All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast. And today we're here with John. Welcome. It is so awesome to have you here today.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. You've given me an excuse to get out of my bathrobe. That's the joke with my wife. When I'm just working from home, it's me in a bathrobe, so I have a shirt on. So
well, there you go. There you go. And I'll tell you, I want to give a shout out to the folks over at the podcast guest platform because John, you and I, we wouldn't even be talking if it weren't for those guys. And I will tell you, we launched this podcast. We launched the Million Dollar Relationships Podcast 2 years and 1 month ago. And I've met a number of really amazing guests through the podcast guest platform. And
it's been great.
Appreciate those guys for reaching out to me and even like suggesting guests like yourself. And so, John, I know I was sharing with you before we hit the record button, and through looking at your website and the work you did, I have really been looking forward to this conversation, this interview, because I've never interviewed anybody who does what you do. And I'm not going to spill the beans by sharing. I'll always wait for you to do that. So what I'd like to do is just kind of start off by, we'll set a little bit of context. I'll turn it over to you so you can share what you do. In fact, that's why I never said your last name, because I didn't want anybody jumping the gun and going like, but I want you to, share what you do, who you serve, what inspires you to do what you, maybe even some backstory on how you got into this, because I would be really curious to hear that. We'll start there and set a little bit of context.
Yeah, perfect. I am a professional hypnotist. And throwing in there, now I've got a really kind of a diverse background, which I'll bring into all of this. Okay. But started out as a professional stage hypnotist, doing stage hypnosis shows. I was doing corporate events and university events, performing for Royal Caribbean Cruise Line as well.
Oh, okay.
And which that was born out of me doing stand-up comedy for over 20 years. But I'll tell you how that how that transition happened in a bit. But from being a professional stage hypnotist, I wound up becoming a YouTube creator of hypnosis and guided meditation videos.
Okay.
And I dedicate most of my time to my YouTube channel now. Haven't performed as much, relative to the lockdowns and everything like that. I was really fortunate that when all the shows were canceled, I was able to do my YouTube channel full time.
Okay.
And I've enjoyed that. So most of my focus is on that now, but I still do get out and perform some live stage hypnosis shows.
Okay.
But it's the thing that, where it all began is I graduated from theater and film school, had a degree in screenwriting. But my last couple of years in college, I discovered stand-up comedy. There was a stand-up comedy club where I went to school. They had an open mic night, and I went up and did open mic, the most terrifying, I think, 3 to 5 minutes of my life ever. But it worked out well enough that the owner said, "Why don't you come back on the weekend and you can open up before the real comedians?"
Wow.
And screenwriting and performing and stand-up comedy, it was all kind of in the same wheelhouse to me because it was all entertainment based. And I was always driven by comedy. I was writing comedy scripts when I was in college. So I figured, it's all together. So I just kind of rolled everything together and started performing professionally, touring the country as a stand-up comedian. Wow. right out of college. Along the way, had some scripts that I'd written, independent films that were produced, comedy scripts, one of which I wrote, produced, and directed. But my passion, my love, was being in front of live audiences.
Okay.
But the dynamic of stand-up comedy radically changed in the early 2000s. And for my generation, we were hearing all the comics in the 90s talk about how cable television is what killed stand-up comedy for them because people stopped going to live clubs. They were hanging out watching Evening at the Improv and Comic Strip Live and all of those shows. For my generation, it was the internet because it began with MySpace. And the popularity of stand-up comedy took off amongst that, that social media platform. So now people were going to the clubs based on, who was their comedian friend on MySpace, how many comics could get out there and push that they were in this comedy club in this town. And the dynamic of it all changed because comedy stopped becoming about who the funniest person was. And then it became who had the most friends on MySpace, who was the most popular. And then it just kind of escalated, obviously, with all the other social media platforms. So the unknown comics, if you will, the lower rung comics, there were freestanding comedy clubs that were open, 5, 6, 7 nights a week throughout the country. And that business model changed. A lot of places closed down. And I never cared about being the most famous or making the most money. I just wanted to be able to go out and enjoy doing, what I did. And I was probably an artist first, still an entrepreneur in there because, this was all about me. I was doing, everything myself. I was my business.
Yeah.
But I also, at the same time, wound up going through a divorce. I had 2 young kids, and there was a lot of upheaval, kind of happening in my personal and my professional life. I wasn't enjoying stand-up comedy the way that I was. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that, I learned in film school that all drama is conflict. There's not going to be a Star Wars if there's no princess to go rescue and Darth Vader to compete with. So I kind of applied that dynamic to what I did on stage. I figured the more drama and dysfunction that there was in my life, the more I could joke about on stage. I had more of my own material to talk about, but sure, that kind of led me down a very dark road. And I was, at what I say, it was probably the darkest pit that I was ever in my life because I wasn't enjoying comedy anymore. Divorced and still in the wrong relationships, dating the wrong women. And what had happened, I was always fascinated by the mind. And I was doing an event where there were multiple shows and things happening throughout the course of the day where I was going to perform stand-up comedy. And what I didn't know was immediately after me, there was a stage hypnotist. Now, in the venue that I was in, it was probably maybe half full for me doing comedy. But when the stage hypnotist went on right after me, it was standing room only. And I said, I'm going to stick around and watch this. And not only was the audience enthralled and engaged and laughing, the volunteers on the stage being hypnotized and, doing fun stuff on stage. And then on top of that, the hypnotist afterwards was selling CDs for stop smoking and weight loss and reduce stress and all this stuff. And people were flocking the stage, throwing money at him hand over fist to buy his product. And I said, I can do that. I want to do that. I know how to be on stage and interact with people. Of course, I just have to figure out the small part about how to hypnotize people. And so, which I did. I went and trained and learned stage hypnosis. And then, of course, along the way, I'm thinking, okay, well, I have this ability now to hypnotize people. I'm understanding the subconscious mind. Let's see what I can do with myself. How can I work on myself to change the things in my life that I was looking to change? So not only did things take off for me professionally, because I was able to go back to the bookers and the agents and the event planners and all of these individuals that I knew through stand-up comedy. I said, I've got a whole new act now. And it just went from 0 to 60 in a very, very short period of time for me. Instead of driving 12 hours to do some, cowboy bar, in Montana, someplace where they were putting me up at a Motel 6 for the night, now I'm being flown first class to do corporate gigs. I'm staying in, nice hotels and being flown around the world performing for Royal Caribbean Cruise Line. And that is what led me into the area of stage hypnosis. But there was a kind of a brief window of time for me there in the beginning where, of course, the big thing for the stage hypnotists were to sell their merchandise after the show. Mm-hmm. And that was CDs at first. But then CDs became obsolete because people didn't have CD players. Everything was switching over to a digital format. Mm-hmm. So now I'm in these message boards or, Facebook groups, and I'm all these hypnotists are talking about, well, people aren't buying CDs anymore. What do we do? What do we offer? And then people were like, well, we can put MP3 files on flash drives and we can sell it that way. And then people were like, yeah, but one person could buy the flash drive and share all the content with, 10 other people. And I thought to myself, well, what I'm going to do, because I never really liked dealing in the physical property. It was one of those things for me. I don't know, after the show, just standing back there hawking wares, that was not something I think I even wanted to try hypnosis to make me feel good about. But so I thought, I'm going to put everything on my website. I'm going to create the digital files and I'll just tell people to go to my website. Well, along the way, I started putting stuff on YouTube and just figured somebody might hear my content on YouTube. They go to my website and they would buy it. Now, of course, I'm having other hypnotists telling me I'm completely crazy for even trying this approach. People they're not going to buy it here. They're not going to do blah, blah, blah. You're leaving money on the table. It's got to be this hard physical property that you can sell right after the show. What I never realized was that people actually use YouTube as a go-to platform to participate in guided meditations and other hypnosis content. So my YouTube channel wound up taking off. And that opened up this whole new avenue for me, another reinvention of myself from a previous reinvention that all, went together. And from that, I think I'm over about 300,000 subscribers now. And it's just been a really wonderful experience to be able to take the combination of my writing skills, of my film school skills, of my hypnosis skills, of my performance skills, and put them all together in a way that I never even imagined. Yeah. But I'm doing everything that I was ever trained to do, anything that I ever learned to do. And I really feel like I'm in a sweet spot because I am enjoying the opportunity to be creative and benefit people. Yeah. So it's not anything I ever, if you had asked me 10 years ago, I couldn't even have conceived that it would be here. And I'm so grateful that it is, because I love where I've landed at and what I'm doing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, before we switch gears and talk about your relationships piece, I'm just curious. So with you I would imagine that February, March of 2020 was a pivot point. That something happened there, and I'm just curious. So when COVID came on the scene in March of 2020, how did that impact? And because I don't even know for sure, but I just get it from what you just shared. I would imagine that there was some kind of pivoting point right there because of COVID that probably took place too. And I'm just kind of curious what that looked like for you in your world.
My wife and I were very fortunate because we kind of felt like, in a lot of ways, we were in a bubble during that period of time.
Okay.
Because even though I had shows that were canceled, my YouTube channel had already started, to take off, okay, and had already been in a position of acceleration. So relative to that, I wasn't going out and performing. I was staying home like everybody else, but I also had the opportunity to dedicate more time and energy to what I was doing there. And it was definitely a time where a lot of people were looking to be able to reduce stress. They were dealing with a lot of, personal drama and, drama for themselves in the world. Yeah. So I was able to just be immersed in that full time. And my wife and I were, we were very fortunate that we didn't experience some of the other challenges that, people went through, that we feel for them, that they went through.
Totally. So nowadays, right now, is your travel schedule, is it like still considerably less than what it used to be?
It is now. Now the funny thing about that is I've also realized, kind of in the wake of COVID, that I've kind of become a bit of a recluse, because I'm hanging out, whispering into a microphone in my recording booth, making my YouTube videos. So I've done a few shows. I've turned down a lot of offers to do shows, but then I just said to my wife, a couple months ago, I go, I deserve to just get back out there and not become complacent. I've got this skill set that I enjoy doing. So I'm not gonna, kind of hide my, my candle under a bushel, or, in my voiceover recording booth anymore. So, in fact, I'm doing an event this weekend, actually, for the Idaho National Guard. So they've got a yearly ball that they do. So we'll be up in Idaho, performing for the Idaho National Guard.
Nice. Okay, I'm really glad that we kind of covered as much as we did there, because right now, the listeners have a really good idea of who you are, and it's gonna be very useful as we move into this next section. So I'm gonna shift gears just a little bit here, and I'll reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, John, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And
yes, okay. there are a couple of people I think of, but the most important person, that $1 million relationship, and this is hands down, and I don't want it to sound cliche, but the moment that I met my wife, Rochelle, that was part of that transitioning period for me back, when I was going through, my own personal drama, and I just started to do hypnosis. And there would have to, if you want to talk about coincidences, there would have to be about 127 coincidences that would have to fall into place for Rochelle and I to meet each other.
Okay.
Now, and it's funny, this is my third marriage. And after the second marriage to my kid's mom, who have a great relationship with my kid's mom, nothing negative to say about her, but we weren't right for each other. And, I was married for a few years in college, and, the previous relationships that I've been, whether they were marriage or just dating somebody, there were these definitive boundaries where, I was this artist, and you didn't tell me how I was going to create my art. You didn't give input on that, or, business decisions, gigs that I was going to do or whatever. You didn't provide any input on that. It was a very compartmentalized, all these relationships were very compartmentalized. This is what you do. This is what I do. This is your profession over here, my profession over here. There's no intermingling of that. But, the personal life, that's where the overlap, would come.
Okay.
When it came to meeting my wife, Rochelle, that is where I went, this is what it's all about. This is what, this is why people get married, because we had such a strong personal connection, but yet what we were both interested in, if you could say metaphysically, stuff about the mind, energy, all of that sort of stuff. We were both at a point where, it's, the line is when the student's ready to meet the master. And that's what I felt like when I met Rochelle, because she had all of this understanding about, the mind and, behaviors and these sort of things, why we do what we do. And when we got together, I learned so much from her that, combined with what I was doing with meditation, and then also with what she was interested in relative to the mind, that's where everything accelerated, and that's where everything took off.
Okay.
And when I do, when I go and perform shows, she was she was there to help. She was my assistant. After the show, she was able to say, okay, this was going on. Like, she could help me. She would point out things things that I deserve to be aware of, areas where I could improve upon, or things that I could do, a little bit differently. I had this ongoing feedback loop with somebody who was there, who genuinely, cared about me and my craft and what I was doing on stage. And then even when it came over to what I was doing with YouTube, she helps me with the ideas. She's able to read over the script. She's able to give me feedback. And I would not be where I am today if it was not for meeting my wife, Rochelle, because she was the biggest teacher. She was the biggest cheerleader. She believed in me more than I believed in me.
Wow.
And it was so important. It's so important in anybody's relationship, or, in your professional life, to have somebody that aligns with you and that supports you, that you're able to resonate on all levels together. Because I never had anything like that. Yeah. And it was just such an eye-opening experience for me that allowed me to be able to soar and to grow and, to accomplish the things that I've had, none of which would have happened had I not met my wife, Rochelle.
Yeah. Wow. I my wife and I just celebrated our 18th anniversary last month, and I so resonate with what you share, because I feel the same exact way about my wife. I mean, man, Lisa is. I would not be where I am today if not for that amazing woman been right alongside me the whole dang way.
Yeah, and it's so funny because it almost sounds cliche when we say that, right? I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for her, but it's a literal fact and truth.
Yeah.
For me, because I don't know what direction I would have gone down, because I was the party stand-up comic who reveled in dysfunction and drama. And I saw a different direction. And I was like, oh, wow, this is what it means to be happy. This is what it means to be in love. This is what it means to be, productive. This is what it means to be aligned with somebody on any level. So anybody that's, when it comes to any business thing, you've got drama maybe at the office, or drama at the business, drama at home. But if you're able to mesh those two worlds in a way that both support each other and are a foundation for each other, where it's not just you're doing your business thing or you're doing your job and I'm doing mine, when that all comes together in perfect harmony, the difference is unbelievable.
Yeah. So I know you're going to be able to come up with tons of examples for what I'm going to ask you, but I'm just going to challenge you to come up with one that really stands out for you. So give me an example of something that has transpired over the course of the period that you and Rochelle have been together, where you were able to make this really big impact, and hands down, that would have never happened if not for Rochelle and you being in the relationship that you're in.
So much of what, if you go to a lot of my content on YouTube it's I don't really do the weight loss or stop smoking. The content that I have on YouTube is hypnosis and meditation, which is more for inner transformation. It's for being able to evolve as an individual, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And all of those, because originally I just started out, here's stop smoking, and here's weight loss, and here's, stop stress, and or whatever the case may be. But she opened my mind up to a completely different way of thinking about life, ways of approaching life, realizing that, our emotional states, we're not victims of other people. We're not the result of what other people do. How we choose to respond to situations, how we manage our emotional states, how we manage our thoughts to, and our emotions, because, those all go together. How we're able to be masters of our mind, masters of our energy, masters of our emotions, those are the things that my wife taught me coming into the relationship. And those are the concepts that I share within across the content that I put out there to allow people to realize for themselves and see within themselves that there is this really powerful being, that we're not subject to the whims of happenstance. To, other people can't make us feel anything or make us feel anything. That's all up to us. And now consciously hearing that idea, somebody might go, well, maybe that makes sense, or maybe it doesn't, or whatever. But when you ingrain that into your subconscious mind, then all of a sudden you're thinking differently and you're feeling differently and you're responding differently. Because the thing that I always say to people, how many times have we read a book, we watched a movie, we've been to a seminar, we've taken a course or whatever it may be, and we go, yeah, that makes so much sense. We're going to do that. And that is going to completely change our lives and everything's going to be wonderful. And then a few days later or a week later, you're back to the same old patterns of behavior that you were in the first place. And that's because we hear something and the conscious mind goes, yeah, that makes sense. The subconscious mind goes, yeah, that makes sense, but not for us, because we're not good enough. We're not smart enough. We're not talented enough. Nothing ever works out for us. So we're not even going to, why even try? So that's why we wind up back into those same patterns of behavior. So it's being able on a subconscious level to rewire ourselves and adjust that programming within our subconscious. And that's what makes all the difference. So these philosophies that my wife taught me about life, I was able to start implementing and rewiring and reprogramming my mind, and seeing the success that I have enjoyed in my life, both personally and professionally. To me, that's the testament of the content that I share with people, because I'm like, this stuff in here wouldn't be in this audio program. It wouldn't be part of the information that I'm sharing on my YouTube channel if it didn't actually really 100% work in my life first.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That is incredibly powerful. For anybody listening to this, John, I knew this was going to be a fascinating conversation. And anybody listening to this is going, dang, Kev, I really like John. I like the way John showed up. If they want to find out more about the work that you do, your YouTube channel, whatever other resources you have, how can they do that?
My website is johnmoyer.com.
Okay.
JOHNMOYER. And that has, links to all the, the different places, my YouTube channel, that sort of thing. Or if you just go into YouTube and you look up John Moyer Hypnosis or John Moyer, you'll find me there. I am not the John Moyer bassist from the heavy metal band Disturbed. I think you'll be able to tell the difference. there is one other John Moyer out there. I love the band Disturbed. He's the bass player, but he and I seem to constantly, people wind up tagging me on Instagram or Twitter, now X or whatever, thinking that I am the John Moyer bassist. But you'll find me on, just look up John Moyer Hypnosis on YouTube and you'll find my stuff there.
Awesome. Well, John, any last thing you feel led to share before we call it a wrap?
The thing that I love to tell people is that the only thing or the only person standing in your way of doing the things that you prefer to do in life, it's you and your mind, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any difference what anybody else says or does. If you believe in yourself, then that's going to be that's what's going to make the difference.
Yeah.
And it's just preferring to achieve something and knowing this thing. And especially in a lot of the content that I do, I never say the word want. I always say the word prefer, because to me, there's the subconscious mind has a very different response to saying, when it hears I want this versus I prefer this, because want keeps it says, okay, well, we don't have something, so therefore we're wanting something, and then that, I think, just keeps us in a perpetual state of wanting. When we say, I'm somebody who prefers, then the subconscious mind starts to operate under the characteristics of, you are this person who prefers X, Y, and Z, and you can go out and make it happen.
Powerful. That's powerful.
But it's just, if you prefer something enough and you're willing to go to all ends to be able to achieve your goals. And for me, if I come from a metaphysical perspective, it's not having to do everything that it takes. It's coming from that space of being willing to do whatever it takes. But then you'll find out that things can show up much easier, rather, as opposed to having to go out and do everything. When you come from that, energetic resonance, that things miraculously show up and work out for you.
Yeah.
So don't just believe in yourself, know in yourself, and it can happen.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's powerful. That's powerful. Well, John, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.